Ahmaud Arbery's name will forever remain alive, yet his blood still screams from the streets in Georgia.
Lawmakers in both chambers offer words of remembrance and lest we forget cautions on this, the third anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery's murder. Good evening. Welcome to Lawmakers on day 23 of the Georgia legislative session. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. Georgia is one of a few states where minors as young as 17 can be prosecuted as adults for certain serious crimes. For years, there's been a bipartisan push to raise the age of juvenile offenders to include 17-year-olds. The chair of the House Juvenile Justice Committee joins us. Also here for our studio discussion, a lawmaker who favors strengthening gun laws. And it's the third year for Representative James Beverly as House Minority Leader. Tonight, he talks about his party's priorities. But first, here's a wrap-up of the action under the Gold Dome today. Today at the Capitol, legislators celebrated Lupus Day and marked the 3-year anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery's killing. 25-year-old Arbery was jogging in a Brunswick, Georgia suburb when 3 white men pursued and fatally shot him. In the House, Representative Sandra Scott galvanized the body into continued action.
Ahmaud Arbery's murder and delayed prosecution shows how bipartisan legislation can pass to balance the scale of justice. As a result of Ahmaud's death, the citizen arrest law was repealed and a new hate crime law was enacted. We are still fighting for law enforcement accountability. Ahmaud Arbery's name will forever remain alive, yet his blood still screams from the streets in Georgia.
And on Twitter, Senator Elena Parent posted, "Never forget Ahmaud Arbery was murdered 3 years ago today. No one should be next." The amended fiscal budget was the big news of the day. The Senate's version of HB 18 was presented by the Senate Appropriations Chair, Blake Tillery.
As you know, there's a little bit over $2 billion that are added in revenue to this budget. You'll see that that's in state general funds, it's about $1.9 billion. It's about 6.8% increase over last year, which is very much in line with inflation.
While most of the budget remained the same, the Senate did make a few changes.
If you flip through the budget and you look just generally at some other big items, I'll hit them for you. You'll see that the Senate's going to add $541,000 in Senate funds. That's just to keep parity with the House. Walking on down through the budget later, you'll see additions that we've made at the Department of Behavioral Health. We know that we're going to need to increase bed space and keep PTRFs and other beds open as they relate to mental health. Also to give breaks at our prisons, because we know that housing these individuals with mental health needs in prisons isn't necessarily the best thing. It's not the best for them. It's not the best for state dollars. And we need to have crisis beds open so that those will be open when we need them.
In education,
the House position was to take $977 million that had already been authorized through ARPA funds and direct the school systems to use those instead. The Senate's proposal takes those ARPA funds, ties it to the $25 million, and says let's reward the schools who best deploy that $977 million.
But Tillery was cautious when looking forward to the next budget.
I think the 23 budget has a little bit more playroom, a little bit more wiggle room for us as legislators than the 24 budget. I think really that the 23 budget will be easier, the 23 amended. So to help us as we begin to fund items in 24 and preparing for what we're seeing nationally as a slowdown, we grabbed some of the items that the governor's budget bonded in the 24 budget and moved them to cash.
But one Republican senator said that he could not support the Republican-led budget.
This is an historic budget, $6 billion. I don't think that's ever happened. And we're not doing meaningful things to lower the cost of living in Georgia. We're going to give a one-time government gimme handout, a little payola to the citizenry. But Mr. President, that doesn't help my kids. That doesn't help my grandkids. And I ask that you consider these things before you vote.
Moore was the only nay vote as the bill passed, 54-1. Also on the Senate floor, SB 63. The bill would require cash bonds for a variety of crimes.
So what this bill does is it puts some rights back into the lives of those individuals who are victims of crimes so that they know that the perpetrators who broke into their lives and either injured them or took something from them, that they have to have a little skin in the game in order to get back out of jail and go out and do what they do.
Democrats opposed the bill, saying that the proposed cash bails hurt just the poor.
Now, this may not seem like a big deal for folks, but I want to just talk about the folks who may commit an offense that could have been a citation, that now they're going to be arrested, have to go down to the jail, be booked, be processed, and have to have somebody to post their bail for them to get out of jail. Might be 1 day, might be 2 days, might be 3 days before somebody shows up to get them out of jail. Well, most employers, if you don't show up in the next 24 hours, you're a no call, no show. You're terminated. Now, this individual that could have gotten a citation for a simple offense has lost their employment. Next thing they're going to lose is their housing. Next thing they lose, their transportation. And so when we talk about addressing the cycle of crime in the state of Georgia, this bill will perpetuate more people being conducive to crime because they don't have the opportunity. They lost that opportunity because they sat in jail because nobody would bond them out.
The bill passed along party lines, 31-23, even though the bill's author agreed to an amendment that would allow the first offense of failure to appear to be exempt from the new schedule. In the House, 10 measures passed, and representatives were not too taxed to talk about taxes. House Bill 162 provides the same one-time credit for 2022 taxes as offered in 2021. The credited amount varies based on filing status and can range from $250 to $500. We're going to spend time now on issues involving juvenile justice and guns. Joining us in the studio are Democratic Representative Ann Allen Westbrook of Savannah and Republican Representative Mandy Ballinger of Canton. She is also chair of the Juvenile Justice Committee in the House.
Yes.
Welcome to Lawmakers. So,
glad to be here.
Chair Ballinger, we've had you here with this before, so let's talk about it again, though, because it's something you feel passionate about, and that is the Raise the Age Act.
Yes.
Tell us about it, and tell us where you think it'll go this year.
I am optimistic this year that it will go to full passage and hopefully make it to the governor's desk where he will hopefully sign it. But basically, our 17-year-olds in the state of Georgia, for any offense, whether it's open container, criminal trespass, indecent exposure, very little, small, what we would consider petty crimes, be it a petty crime or a misdemeanor or a felony, those are adjudicated if they're 17 in our state and superior courts. So right now we're trying to move those 17-year-olds because they're still in high school, they're still kids, their brain is still developing, they don't have the impulse control, they're unduly influenced by their peers. All of these reasons kind of should place them within the realm of juvenile court.
Yeah, what led you to your interest in this bill? Maybe, 4 or 5 years ago, I think.
It was just something that needed to be fixed, and nobody was really willing to do it. They saw it as a big lift. It had been considered in the state since 1973. Various people had kind of worked on it over the years, and nobody had gotten it across the finish line. So with kind of a newcomer's hubris, a certain amount of hubris and a certain amount of tenacity, and just the feeling that it's just the right thing to do. Our 17-year-olds should not go to state or superior court. They should be in juvenile court.
And we're one of only 3 states that has them in the adult court.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. We are one of 3 states that kind of cling to that antiquated practice. For example, Alabama, which is next door to us, is over 50 years ahead of us on that policy issue. They started adjudicating their 17-year-olds in juvenile court over 50 years ago.
Yeah, and one more quick question on this is one of the things I've heard the sheriffs have talked about when they've testified is that taking 17-year-olds with the younger ones is they may unduly influence younger offenders. How do you respond to that?
Wouldn't the 17-year-olds be unduly influenced by the adults that they're being put into jail with? The 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds, the career criminals that the 17-year-olds are going to be exposed to in adult jails. That would be my response to that.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes and keep up to date on that. I want to switch gears a little bit with you, Representative Westbrook. You favor 2 bills, in particular HB 44 and 45, that would align Georgia with the federal Brady law when it comes to firearms. And Brady requires criminal history background checks and waiting periods. So talk about your interest in those bills.
Sure. Well, I'm very interested in both of those bills, as well as a couple of other bills that I'll mention as well. The first one is for universal background check, so a background check on every firearm transfer that happens. Right now, there are background checks conducted on sales that are made by federally licensed firearms dealers, but there's a large sector of the market that doesn't go through that market. They are person-to-person transfers, private transfers, and they're not really subject to any background check at all. We know that as far as policy measures go, that particular measure is associated with cutting just about every category of gun violence in half, whether it's homicides, whether it's domestic violence shootings, whether it's law enforcement shootings, all of those things. So it's a measure that has empirical data to show that it works, that it saves lives. And I'll also mention it's a measure that is broadly popular across lines of difference, like party affiliation, whether you're a gun owner or not. There's just broad agreement that this is a good thing to do. Most firearm owners are happy to go through it themselves when they make their own purchases, but for some reason it's a real stumbling block in this state to get that passed. So that's one of them. The other one is a 3-day waiting period that the House Bill number you mentioned. In recent years, it's been shown that the time to crime period is a factor. So in other words, people are buying firearms and quickly going out and using them for some unlawful purpose. And so that's one thing that would address. But one that I'm probably most excited about this session is House Bill 161, which is the Pediatric Safe Storage Act. And that helps us create this culture of responsible gun ownership in Georgia. Firearms are the leading cause of death for Georgia children and teens. The leading cause of death, not car accidents, not drownings, not a lot of those things that we associate with childhood deaths. It's gotten to the point where it's now firearms. And it is my belief that in this state, we've especially over the last 10 years seen a real unraveling of the protections that we do have, such as permitless carry that passed last year, as well as putting guns in more places and more hands. It's just more access. And that leads to children dying, and that's what we're seeing happen. I will just say, too, I'm very interested in Rep. Ballinger's bill as well. I think we agree that we love children and that we want to protect Georgia's children. And I think the data is there that says teenagers are still, their brains are still developing. And, when we put firearms in the access of children whose brains are still developing, they can make decisions you can't come back from. You could end up in prison. You could end up killing someone yourself. You could end up, playing with it and injuring yourself or a member of your household. So that's some of the bills I'm interested in this session.
Okay. So, Chair Ballinger, I'm going to turn to you on this because you did vote in favor of the permitless carry, but also you have an A+ rating from the NRA. You've received the NRA Defender of Freedom Award last year. So what are your thoughts about what she's talking about?
I have yet to see anything that proved the efficacy of gun control. I think responsible gun ownership is obviously something that we will continue. Whenever we're trying to constrict gun ownership, what we wind up doing is constricting our lawful carriers. The people that abide by the rules, the people that will, get the background checks and go through the proper responses. The people that are going to, carry without go to a person-to-person sale instead of going to a licensed firearm carrier without having that background check that is required by the federal law. Those are the people that are going to get up to, I would say, mischief with their firearms. They're not law abiders, they're law breakers. And so often we tend to target those that are the law abiders. And we need to get at the law breakers whenever we're trying to do that.
What about the 3-day waiting period?
I have yet to see the legislation. I'm not sure what committee it's in, but I have yet to see the legislation. I think that given that if somebody has a background check on file, which is why many of them, even though we do allow for permitless carry, a lot of our licensed firearm carriers in the state still maintain that carry permit, is so that they don't have to go through the background check, because they already have one basically on file with the probate court. They've already submitted to that. So a lot of them still carry that permit just so they don't have to go through that. Yeah.
Your response to that?
I think Rep. Ballinger is making a persuasive argument for a law that we got rid of last year. And so I'll just make that note. And I also think it's apt to point out on the anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery's death that there are folks in our state who are law-abiding citizens right up until the moment when they're not. As we saw with the McMichaels, law enforcement background, all of those things. It's just one more area where you look at access to firearms and you mix that with at least implicit bias, if not outright racism, and the results are deadly. So I think it's an apt day to remember that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you also about what she discussed, and that is being able to keep the guns in some type of protective form within homes.
I think that's part of responsible gun ownership. That's something that all, I think, gun advocates advocate for, is responsible gun ownership, and that means keeping them away from children, keeping them locked up and separate. So I think that's just part of responsible gun ownership.
And you don't need a law for that. That's
No.
what you're saying. You feel that there needs to be one.
I think there needs to be one. It's if that's the responsible gun ownership that we have in Georgia, it's not working. Facts are stubborn things, and this is the leading cause of death for Georgia's teens and children. I think policy and law has a role to play, and culture has a role to play, and those things work together. And right now, they're not working for our kids.
Okay, well, we're going to find out how those bills, I know you have some other things you're interested, especially with coastal Georgia. We'll have to have you come back on that.
Thank you.
We'll keep up on your bills too and see how they go. I want to thank you both for being here today.
Thank you
And
for having me.
coming up, as the session begins to wind down, what are the Democratic caucus priorities? House Minority Leader James Beverly lays them out.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Here's what's new this month with Passport.
Kirsten had a lot of courage. She fought for Black culture.
They could have killed you. You're exactly what we need right now. Oh my God.
What is this?
She was poisoned.
These and all your favorite shows are available with Passport. Support your PBS station and stream more with Passport on the PBS app.
We care about things that affect the lives of every American.
We are there at the front lines
to get to the heart of what really matters in every issue.
This country has not seen this in 80 years.
This extraordinary moment in American history.
You're making such a huge impact.
Trust is at the heart of what we do.
One of the easiest ways to support GPB is to become a monthly GPB sustainer. Your monthly support continues automatically month after month and supports not only the great programming that you love on GPB, but also our efforts in the community. GPB is committed to provide a trusted space for lifelong learning on the air, digitally and in person all across Georgia. All this is made possible with your monthly support. And we can't do it without you, so please donate right now at gpb.org/give. And thanks.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry. This year in the House, out of 180 members, 79 are Democrats. That's 2 more than in the previous session. While Republicans greatly hold the balance of power, Democratic leaders are hopeful things are going to change in the coming years, especially given the greater diversity within the party. I talked to House Minority Leader James Beverly about that and more, beginning with the party's priorities this session. Well, let's talk about your priorities. What are the Democratic Party's priorities?
Number one, without a shadow of a doubt, is extending health care benefits to all Georgians, right? We used to say Medicaid expansion. We realized that, they're not going to do that. All right, what if we extend, health care benefits? Same thing. But the reality is 500,000 Georgians right now don't have health insurance. 500,000. And the truth of the matter is it costs about $300 million. Now, the governor will say, hey, we got this budget. We have a budget, $6.6 billion surplus, right? If you just took the interest at 5% and you just took the interest off of the money that sits somewhere that we don't know, it's $330 million. Just the interest is enough to cover 500,000 Georgians. That's a tragedy. Now, so that's our number one priority. The second thing is sort of like the first. There are going to be about 525,000 Georgians we predict right now are going to lose their health care benefits because Medicaid, you have to reapply for Medicaid benefits April 1. And they have a workforce of about 400 people to deal with 2.7 million folk. And there's no community benefits agreements. There's nothing that says we're going to get out here and let people know this is happening. And so again, you know, we have a surplus. Hire people, get them into communities, let people know this is going on, because again, 525,000 Georgians may not have health care by the end of this year.
Let's stick with health care a little bit. The governor, in order to extend anything, wants people to work or volunteer, that kind of thing. Your response?
Yeah, people right now, and I mean, it's almost like an old cultural warfare kind of deal, right? People right now go back to school, technical school, to be retrained, to be retooled, to retool that. What do they do? So if you don't work in, if I'm going to school, you can't have it both ways. If I got to go back to school to just retool my skill set, I'm not working 30 hours or 40 hours or 80 hours or whatever it is a week. So you have a perverse incentive. So do you work and get health care, or do you go to school and retool yourself? The guy who works at Walmart or the person who works at AutoZone, and it may be part-time because I have families to juggle, right? Kids to juggle. I mean, those folk need health care. Because if you don't have it, if you don't extend it to folk who are in the workforce or those who are trying to get into the workforce, then that creates some real problems for us in the whole economical system of healthcare. Because where do they go? They go to the emergency room when they get sick. And that drives up the cost of healthcare for everyone.
Okay, you mentioned healthcare. What else?
Our second priority is housing. Right now, you know, we have a housing shortage for sure. You got rents that are out of control. And part of the incentive to build housing in Georgia, there's a low-income housing tax credit that's applied to multifamily homes. And so if you build, multifamily dwellings, apartment buildings, and so forth, you get this low-income housing tax credit. It's 9% or 4%. We just dropped a bill recently to say, hey, listen, why don't you extend that credit to people who build single-family homes? So if you build a house that, you know, area median income, you don't go above, you know, a certain amount of the poverty level, then you can start to stimulate developers and builders to build homes in these areas that don't have affordable housing if you give them a tax credit and say, we'll cap it at this rate. And so we have to do something with that. And I think the governor is right to talk about it, but what is the action? And I think we have some real demonstrable ways in which to change the way we put deal flow into communities. And part of that is extending the low-income housing tax credit to single-family dwellings. And so that's extremely important to us.
What about housing when it comes to tenants' rights, landlords and how they're behaving, some of the dangerous dwellings that are out there?
Lord have mercy. I think Representative Spencer Fry had a press conference, I think maybe last week. And one of the things that happens is you have corporate buyers, players who are coming in, buying up these properties. They depreciate off the property, leave it wherever they're going to leave it. Then they sell it, turn back around and sell it. And so there's no accountability for this corporate raid of buying up all the housing. And you see it everywhere, right? And people call and buy houses and buy apartment complexes, but they have no intention of making sure that this dwelling is okay. And so we need to say, all right, if you're going to be Georgia, if you're going to buy a Georgia home, should there be some restrictions around who buys it? Should it be foreign countries or foreign nationals or whatever? It should be somebody from other states? I don't know. But Spencer has some real interesting ideas about that. He's a guy who worked at Habitat for Humanity for years. 30 years, I think he's been in business. And I think that there is something that we dropped as well. So we want to make sure that the folk who are buying these places, we hold them accountable. Because if not, we see what's going on with these deplorable conditions because the landlord leaves, they don't care, they sell it to somebody else, and then the victims are the people who live in these dwellings.
Okay, healthcare, housing, what else?
The next thing I think is interesting, and this is something that was brought to us. I didn't bring this, but it is sports betting and casino gaming. That's on everybody's mind, right? We believe that Democrats in the House really believe that it should be the people who get a chance to decide what it should be, right? So a constitutional amendment. We certainly think that if you have an opportunity for the voters to say, hey, we want this, then let them vote for it. What we're most concerned about, though, is the infrastructure. Should it be a lottery game? Should it be a different organization that manages this? And we think it should be a different organization, not necessarily a lottery game. Now, if it does come through in statute, then what are the opportunities within the statute? In statute, just for those who don't know, statute in the House requires 91 votes, and so it's a little easier to get over that hurdle. A constitutional amendment requires 120 votes out of 180. The statute says if sports betting comes online, then money has to be released into education. And we think that there's so much money in education right now. I mean, there's $2 billion of reserves in education, That money needs to be released to go to capital improvements in preschool, transportation. There's a lot of ways to do it. And so we think that, yeah, sports betting would be great, but the lottery already has a bunch of money.
Okay. Other issues.
The other issues that we're hearing, I hope we don't get into this cultural warfare stuff that these guys got going on. And what I mean by that, specifically is, sort of last year it was, the governor was talking about woke culture and all that stuff he's talking about. And from what I understand, they're sort of doubling down on that in the Senate. And so we're watching stuff over there right now, like, mandatory minimum sentences. I think SB, if I'm not mistaken, is Senate Bill 44, if I'm not mistaken. Mandatory minimum sentences. We're going to be dealing with that. And so part of our job is to be on the defense about that kind of stuff and then not say, no, not this time. I think Speaker Burns, quite frankly, he's a reasonable, decent man. And I actually like him as a person. I really actually like him. But he's always been a straight shooter. And I don't think we're going to see what he does when this stuff starts coming over. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he does, to really being a partner with him and saying, listen, is this really what's good for Georgia?
Got to ask about public safety. You didn't mention it a lot, but are there any issues within public safety?
Yeah, so right now, so gun safety and public safety, right? So I hate to conflate them, but I think we should have universal background checks, right? And just have common sense storage requirements for firearms. The number one thing that kills kids, teenagers in the state of Georgia, gun violence. And so whether it's gun violence or accidental death, right? Guns are it. And so we have to really deal with that from a public safety standpoint, from a healthcare standpoint. And we have some interesting legislation around that. Hopefully our Republican colleagues will take some of that stuff up and we can start doing some stuff to protect our children.
Finally, you mentioned the diversity of your caucus.
Oh my.
Young, old, different ethnicities. What's that been like to have everybody come together?
Fascinating. It is fascinating. I mean, we have a Pakistani Jew. We have 5 Nigerians, right, who got elected. Where does that happen? We have old school, young, we have labor, we have doctor, we have anesthesiologists. I mean, you name it. Our caucus, I think we picked up 7 attorneys this go round. And so it is so diverse. I mean, I'll give a shout out to Patty Bentley, right? Strawberry Queen, right? in South Georgia. I mean, it's fascinating. And these people are smart. And so it's not just that they're diverse, they are absolute go-getters. They are intellectually, there's something, they are some workhorses. And so how to manage that and try to say, okay, what does it work? And so my job is always going to be, first and foremost, the caucus is first. For me, nothing else is first. It's the caucus first, and I'm last. But I'm last in effect of trying to say, listen, what is the work that we need to do to benefit Georgians? And I got so many bright minds and so many people who are ready to go get it. I'm excited. And so I think that over the next couple of years, this house is going to flip. So you guys are listening. It's going to flip. And when it does, Georgia's going to be better off because these folk, I'm so glad that they are part of my caucus and that I get a chance to lead them.
I want to thank House Minority Leader James Beverly for that interview. That does it for Lawmakers today. We'll be back on Monday for Day 24. For news on politics in Georgia and nationwide, tune in to Political Rewind with Bill Nigut tomorrow at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Good night.